Hey, I'm Rob, and I want to continue this conversation about AI governance. And this time, I want to talk a little bit about some real world cases where AI governance didn't carry out in exactly the way that we would have expected it to or wanted it to. Last time, we talked a little bit about governance frameworks. This time, we're going to emphasize a little bit more about why these things are so important because it gets shown when things go wrong just how critical governance frameworks and how critical governance really is. So let's talk about a couple of examples. First, how about Air Canada's bot blunder? And this is a real world use case, not to pick on any of these individual organizations specifically, but this really happened that in 2024, there was an instance of a man who was booking a plane trip to go to visit family to partake in a funeral. Someone had passed away, and this man is going to travel to be with loved ones at this difficult time. And the man hopped on Air Canada's website, starts to book his flight, and Air Canada helpfully offered up an AI chatbot on their website to answer customer questions about booking and to give additional information and to kind of assist the customer in performing these types of transactions. So the man is having a conversation with the chatbot and talking about why he's going to fly and that kind of thing. And the bot informs him that he can get a discount because of what they call a bereavement discount, going to see traveling because of someone's death, right? Traveling to bereave or to grieve someone, the loss of someone. And the bot says, you have 90 days after the flight to go ahead and claim this discount. And the man thinks, okay, he'll go ahead and book and then get the discount later. It's kind of a hurry. He's got to get out of town real fast. Unfortunately, when death happens, you don't have a lot of time to plan in some occasions. So he had to go real fast and he was going to deal with the discount later. So travels, comes back after the fact. He goes and requests his discount. Air Canada says, sorry, that's not how it works. You actually have to claim the discount before traveling, and you cannot get the discount after the fact. The man says, wait a minute, I was on your website. I chatted with your AI chatbot. It told me I had 90 days. Air Canada comes back and says, no, that's not true. As a matter of fact, they went back and checked the transcripts of the bot's conversation with the man. They said the bot dropped in a link that linked to our policies. And if you had read all the policies, you would have been able to see that indeed you have to claim the discount before. So man says, well, that may be, but your bot said something different, contradictory, as a matter of fact, to that. So since the bot represents you, I want my discount. They couldn't come to an agreement. They end up taking it to court. The court ends up finding and deciding that the customer in this instance was right, that since the bot was making representations on behalf of Air Canada, and since the customer reasonably relied upon those representations and as a result experienced damages, the inability to claim the discount, then Air Canada was responsible for going ahead and refunding this person the discounted amount in this instance. So the customer won the lawsuit. And the reason this relates to AI governance is because in the last discussion, we were talking about some of the principles of AI governance. We went through a couple of governance frameworks. One of the governance frameworks was the OECD framework that has 5 principles and 5 recommendations. And one of the principles listed in that conversation is accountability. And accountability means that in this instance, since the bot was making representations on behalf of the company, if the bot made a mistake, because Air Canada is accountable for everything that the bot represents, ultimately that mistake ends up being something that they're responsible for, right? So maybe Air Canada isn't necessarily reading every single statement being made by the bot in real time. Maybe a supervisor is not necessarily reviewing it. Maybe the designers and programmers aren't necessarily testing every single possible question that the person could ask. And maybe there's a bunch of teams and individuals responsible for signing off and for the quality of this bot, and third parties and language models and all these other things that are involved. But nonetheless, even if Air Canada is not responsible for every single word the bot publishes, they're ultimately accountable. They have to answer for the things that the bot does. And so in this instance, they were found accountable. And the big challenge or issue here is actually not just the mistake, but Air Canada's sort of initial inability or lack of willingness to accept accountability right off the bat, right? Because if they are going to reap the benefits of this innovation and this technology, you would want them to likewise also claim accountability for the actions when things go wrong. Now, there may be a lot that Air Canada is doing. Perhaps this one single event is not representative of their full approach, but this single instance kind of reveals a governance challenge for Air Canada. How about another scenario, slightly more complicated, about a situation where a tweet started off a bit of a problem maelstrom for Apple and for their underwriting bank, Goldman Sachs, for the Apple Card. Okay, so back in 2019, the account at DHH, this is a famous entrepreneur and startup founder and software programmer. He invented Ruby on Rails. They run a very good company. They produce a well-known product, Basecamp. They have written books. This person has written books. So a really popular account tweets out, "The Apple Card is such a blank sexist program. My wife and I filed joint tax returns, live in a community property state, have been married a long time, yet Apple's black box algorithm thinks I deserve 20 times the credit limit she does, and no appeals work." That was the tweet, or the summarization of the tweet this person sent out. And as soon as he says, "Hey, Apple gave me 20 times the credit that they gave my wife, that's unfair, and I'm trying to ask them for help, and then I'm not getting it," other people pile on, including Steve Wozniak, the co-founder of Apple himself, says, "Oh, I also had like a shockingly high credit limit in comparison to my spouse." And then other people jumped on and said, "Whoa, me too. My spouse also is getting a low credit limit." And then suddenly people identify a pattern, right? Right brain thinking, they identify a pattern. Left brain thinking, they try to find an explanation for this pattern. So the pattern appeared to be that women, in this case, is some spouses, sometimes just other women, were receiving lower credit limits. So it looked like that's what the algorithm was doing. Huge problem. And of course, not legal to discriminate solely on the basis of something like gender in terms of these types of lending and financial services decisions. So that kind of created a big problem where the New York Department of Financial Services says, "Oh boy, we're going to actually have to investigate this and see if something inappropriate is going on here." They go in, they do an investigation. A year and a half later, they publish a report on their Apple Card investigation. And it turns out that they went through and did the analysis, got the explanations, reviewed the decision-making technology, the governance, the oversight, the systems design and implementation, the maintenance, everything for this credit system. And it turns out that they actually found that it was not discriminating against women. As a matter of fact, there were good, explainable reasons. Well, I'm not going to say good, that's a judgment. There were explainable reasons why one person was given higher credit limit than another. And those reasons did not include gender. They included a whole host of things, like whose name was on the mortgage and who had had commercial transactions and who had lines of credit with their business and who had had this certain number of accounts and business accounts and lending accounts and investment accounts and brokerage accounts and all these other things. So that even though husband and wife oftentimes have very similar profiles, perhaps, and perhaps not, it still doesn't mean that they're going to receive the exact same credit decisions, because there are small differences that can add up to big changes in decisions. So there was this big sort of like public outcry that is very negative and undesirable for Apple, undesirable for Goldman Sachs, who is backing the Apple Card, the bank backing the Apple Card. And so it was not positive. And the challenge here was explainability. Last time we talked about in several governance frameworks, there's this principle of explainability as well, and transparency. Even in the OECD AI governance framework, the principle of transparency is mentioned. And that means transparency means you should be able to understand why these decisions are being made. And when DHH tags on that 3-word sentence, no appeals work, he's saying, I'm reaching out to them, I'm asking for an explanation, and I'm not getting a satisfactory explanation. And this is especially interesting with the Apple Card, because one of the excellent customer experiences of the Apple Card is that there's this very, very fast sort of application. It's done right on your phone. It's fully digital. You don't go anywhere. You get a response back very fast, a credit decision. The card is issued in the phone. It's all digital. So it's a very seamless, very fast, very friendly, low friction customer experience. And then if you have to get these types of questions answered, they would hopefully have some kind of similarly smooth customer experience. Not necessarily as fast, perhaps, but a similarly smooth customer experience in getting some questions answered about these types of decisions. They were not. So there was this algorithmic decision-making process, automated decision-making process. It initially kicked off very well. When there was questions, there was not transparency. So a lack of one of the underlying principles of AI governance or automated decision-making governance in this instance. And then there's a third example of a system that is perhaps far more controversial, consequential, and drew more attention even still. And that is, there is an algorithm that has been used by courts in the United States to evaluate the risk of someone becoming a repeat offender. And then those things get considered when we're making sentencing types of decisions or making decisions about the harshness or the risk of some person or something like that. So this algorithm is the Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions algorithm. And that is very long. So what they do is they abbreviate it COMPAS, COMPAS, and they call it by that name, right? And it's produced by this organization, North Point. It has indeed been relied on by U.S. courts, even in Broward County, Florida, very close to where I live, to make these kinds of sentencing recommendations and considerations. One issue here with this algorithm is that it's owned by this private company, North Point. And because of that, there's certain private intellectual property and a proprietary model in this algorithm that is used to help interpret this risk and inform these decisions on recommendations. Now, anytime you have something private and not published and proprietary, that means it's very hard to do inspection on the underlying mechanics of the decision making. So when ProPublica in 2016 went and did their own independent analysis, they came back and published a widely circulated story that says there's bias in this algorithm and that it's actually being unfortunately resulting in higher risk scores for Black individuals than white individuals. So as a result of that, there could be harsher sentencing or harsher consideration or different types of situations for certain types of defendants. And in addition to it predicting higher recidivism rates, even for Blacks. For both Blacks and whites, it appeared to, according to ProPublica, produce higher rates of recidivism of repeat offenders than were actually occurring anyways, right? So it's worse for Blacks, but bad for both is kind of the oversimplified version of ProPublica's conclusions, along with a host of other considerations that they published. There was a lot of back and forth from North Point, the company that produces the algorithm and provides the software, from other independent researchers and analysts as well that disagreed with ProPublica's analysis, and others that felt that they agreed, and ProPublica made the data available, and there was kind of back and forth. But even if ProPublica was wrong, the fact that, and it's not completely clear either way, ultimately there's a lot of evaluation and judgment and decision making and model analysis and model governance considerations in this situation. Regardless of the exact conclusion that different people may draw from this, this is a very, very serious application of algorithmic decision making. So very serious example of machine learning and artificial intelligence that has huge consequences for justice and for people's lives and for our legal system. So lots of consequence, lots of need for governance. And if there's a lack of transparency because of a proprietary model and system, then that can create additional challenges and undermine credibility and trust. So part of the reasons that these governance frameworks are so important is not just to balance value and risk, and not just to ensure the upholding of our values and ethical norms as a society, which is also very important, but also to maintain the credibility of these systems so that we can believe when we're balancing value and risk and upholding the ethical values of society. So all these things tie together, which is why in many of these overarching governance frameworks, there are things like transparency, accountability, protection for privacy, and the protection of individual and personal information, and then defenses against algorithmic biases, and then human oversight and ultimate accountability as well, and ultimately, safety and protection from harm and security, and all these types of things are all so integral to an effective AI governance framework. So those are some situations of the use of AI running into some progressively serious consequences, right? Started off with a plane ticket that's bad and needed to be remedied, and then credit decisions that can affect a lot of people in a consequential way, and then finally justice decisions that can really change people's lives and shape certain aspects of our society and our trust in our institutions. So these are some of the many reasons why AI governance is so important, and why we can see when it doesn't exactly serve our ultimate goals and values, why it can be so consequential.